Hello and welcome to HITC Sevens and to today's video in which I am clearly trying to make out as though I'm cooler than I actually am. The expression, the streets won't forget, is one which has become increasingly common in the weird world of football Twitter, and whilst it was pretty clear the type of player who fit the criteria, I must admit to googling the term in an attempt to find an official definition. I couldn't find one, but for those of you who don't know, and as far as I can tell, I think a classic streets won't forget player is someone who perhaps had a brief run of outstanding form, had an eccentric style of play, or enjoyed a bit of a cult following without ever really getting mainstream recognition. You wouldn't really say that the streets won't forget Lionel Messi, because no one will forget Lionel Messi, he's a much too established legend of the game. Typical streets won't forget players include the likes of Hatem Ben Arfa, Adel Taarabt, Dimitri Payet, Michu and Nani. I won't be including any of them, or any players who are routinely described as the streets not forgetting, since otherwise I'd be bringing nothing new to the conversation, and I think you all deserve better than that. Well, maybe not all of you, but most of you. As you can tell, it tends to be forward players, flair players, wingers and number 10s, but this is an 11, so we'll be getting some streets won't forget defenders and a goalkeeper as well. One last thing, I'm not going to be including anyone from the 1950s or anything like that, as much as I'd love to, because I don't think that's really what a streets won't forget 11 is all about. And sadly, in reality, the streets have forgotten most of those players. Without any further preamble then, here is my streets won't forget 11. Goalkeeper. Jussi Jääskeläinen. I had my doubts about including Jussi Jääskeläinen in this 11 since he was an established international for Finland who made a huge number of appearances in the Premier League. Nonetheless, and though there were a couple of more obscure names that I could have gone with, I still think Jussi Jääskeläinen is a worthy inclusion. Signed by Bolton Wanderers for just £100,000 in 1997, back when the Trotters were in the second tier, Jääskeläinen went on to play more than 500 games for the club, the vast majority in the Premier League, followed by brief stints at West Ham United and Wigan Athletic. At his peak, which was probably in the early to mid 2000s, I honestly think Jääskeläinen was among the best goalkeepers in Europe. He did the simple things well and with minimal fuss, in addition to pulling off some spectacular saves on a not infrequent basis. I'd put him among the top 10 goalkeepers of the Premier League era and not far off the top 5, so he gets us started. Right back. Josimar. I said this video wouldn't include any ancient history, and I will stay true to my word, but Brazilian legend Josimar is by far the oldest player to feature, and for good reason too. Ahead of the 1986 World Cup, there were no doubts about the fact that it would be Flamengo star Leandro who started for Brazil at right back. However, when he was ruled out for injury, a relatively unknown fullback from mid-table Botafogo got a phone call he didn't expect. That man was Josimar, who made his debut for Brazil at the World Cup, and had a tournament that neither he nor the streets would ever forget. Despite only ever winning 16 caps for Brazil, only featuring at one World Cup, and only scoring 2 goals, Josimar scored 2 of the all-time great World Cup goals. Unfortunately for Josimar, his fall would be as rapid and dramatic as his rise, and in his own words, the blondes came and the training went. But for his heroics at Mexico 86, and for his image as the classic adventurous Brazilian fullback, he'll always be a cult hero. Centre-back. Alex. Staying in Brazil for now, a nation that tends to produce defenders who are not quite like defenders from anywhere else, the same is true of former Chelsea star Alex. The phrase, when he hits the ball it stays hit, has never been more applicable than when characterising an Alex free kick. The former Santos star hit double figures in terms of goals scored in only his second season as a professional, which prompted a transfer to Chelsea. Nicknamed Tang for obvious reasons, Alex spent the first 3 seasons contracted to the Blues on loan at PSV, but went on to play 134 games at Stamford Bridge before moves to PSG and AC Milan. He only won 17 caps for Brazil, but as a powerful centre-back with a right foot that could demolish buildings, Alex is a classic streets won't forget player in my book, and that free kick against Liverpool in the Champions League clinched his inclusion. Centre-back. Brede Hangeland. For a solid 5 or 6 years, Brede Hangeland and Aaron Hughes formed a really formidable centre-back partnership at Fulham, one which famously saw them finish above the likes of Tottenham and Man City one season, in addition to reaching the final of the Europa League. Hughes was a big no-nonsense centre-back, but Hangeland towered over him, and indeed almost anyone in the league at the time, at 6 foot 6 inches tall. The Scandinavian man mountain was freakishly consistent at Craven Cottage, and when he was at his best, he kept some of the best centre-forwards in Europe quiet for a full 90 minutes. In particular, the streets won't forget Hangeland's 2010-11 campaign, in which Fulham finished 8th and Hangeland was the club's second highest scorer with 7 goals. Left back, Fábio Aurélio. Whilst it was a free kick for Chelsea against Liverpool that sealed centre-back Alex's inclusion in this 11, it was a free kick for Liverpool against Chelsea that probably convinced me that left-back Fábio Aurélio ought to feature. In fact, fellow former Liverpool left-back Emiliano Insua, who now plays for LA Galaxy, also made my shortlist. In the end, I went with Aurélio though, making 3/4 of our backline Brazilian, which is of course exactly how it should be. The former Sao Paulo star won 2 La Liga titles under Rafa Benitez at Valencia before following the Spaniard to Liverpool. He had an injury-ravaged time at Anfield, but still enjoyed some memorable moments. In addition to his quick-thinking free kick against Chelsea, Aurélio also scored for the Reds in a 4-1 win against Manchester United. He never won a cap for Brazil, but he makes our Streets Won't Forget 11, which I think we can all agree is a far more prestigious achievement. Central midfield, Guti. I grew up idolising the star-studded Real Madrid team of the early to mid-2000s, which was blessed with hugely celebrated names like Iker Casillas, Roberto Carlos, Zinedine Zidane, David Beckham, Luis Figo, Ronaldo and Raul. One man who never enjoyed that kind of celebrity outside of Madrid at least was Guti. The 2 aspects of Guti's game that always stood out to me were his incredible vision and his appalling discipline. Only Fernando Hierro and Sergio Ramos have received more red cards at Real Madrid than Guti, but the hot-headed Spaniard, who spent 24 years at the Bernabeu, was also a joyous footballer who was brilliant on the ball, could see a complete picture, and had a world-class range of passing. Guti only ever won 13 caps for Spain, and he was never as celebrated as most of his Real Madrid teammates, but he has a playmaking highlights reel that could rival almost anyone's. Central midfield, Moussa Dembele. Another fantastic central midfielder who never got the credit he deserved, it is only since Moussa Dembele left European football that people seem to have started to recognise his talents, suggesting that the streets have indeed not forgotten. Because of his size, Dembele is 6'1" and has no lack of strength, there was sometimes a misconception that Dembele was some kind of marauding midfield destructor who was going to break up play and keep things ticking over. In reality, he spent his early years playing as a winger and was probably happiest playing as a number 10. So gifted on the ball, Dembele could beat players for fun, he could run with the ball at speed, and he had a brilliant knack for releasing the ball right at the crucial moment before losing possession. Tottenham, Fulham and AZ Alkmaar fans don't need reminding of Dembele's talents, and a quick look at the Belgians' highlights reel will show you why the streets won't forget him either. Right wing, JJ Okocha. I promised on Twitter that I would include Giovanni in this 11, but I didn't want to include 2 former Hull City stars, so the Brazilian will have to settle for a spot on the bench. Whilst JJ Okocha made some sensational cameo appearances in Hull City's 2007-08 promotion season, he spent his best years at Bolton Wanderers and Paris Saint-Germain. Quite possibly the most audacious footballer of all time, there are only a handful of Brazilians who even come close to Okocha's levels of flair and invention in possession of the ball. A prime example of the type of player that just doesn't exist anymore, the Nigerian would happily beat someone solely for the sake of beating them, and typically in rather extravagant fashion, although don't mistake that for me suggesting he lacked end product. Okocha was talented enough to start for any team on earth, but the fact he played some of his best football for Bolton only elevates his cult hero status. Left wing, Florent Malouda. Obviously, I'm playing 4-4-2, the formation that the streets will never forget. And on the left flank, we have our second Chelsea player from that sort of mid to late 2000s through to the early 2010s era. When I was still at school, I used to watch literally whatever football was on the TV, and that included a few occasions in which I saw Florent Malouda starring for Lyon during his final season in Ligue 1. I can remember boring my dad senseless by telling him how great the Frenchman was going to be for Chelsea, and in truth, he probably never really hit those heights. Malouda never made the PFA Team of the Year, and he won't go down as a Premier League legend, but he was still a brilliant wide man who provided some unforgettable moments. Certainly, I'll never forget the now 40-year-old French Guiana native, and hopefully there's a small subsection of you who are in the same boat. Centre forward, Roque Santa Cruz. The first of our 2 centre forwards, I was spoiled for choice up front, but how could I possibly leave out Roque Santa Cruz? A lot of people forget, or simply never knew, that Roque Santa Cruz was a 5-time Bundesliga champion with Bayern Munich before he even arrived in the Premier League. But the Paraguayan was rarely the star man in Bavaria, hence his move to Blackburn. Santa Cruz set the Lancashire outfit back just £3.5 million, but he immediately became one of the Premier League's most lethal marksmen. In his debut campaign, Santa Cruz scored 23 goals in all competitions, and he finished 4th in the Premier League scoring charts, ahead of Manchester United duo Wayne Rooney and Carlos Tevez. That was the best we ever saw of Santa Cruz in Europe, as he struggled the following season, and particularly following a big money move to Manchester City, but he was very memorable in 07-08. Aged 39, Santa Cruz is still starring for Club Olimpia in Paraguay now, and he remains a full Paraguayan international. Centre forward, Amr Zaki. Egyptian great Amr Zaki laughs in the face of Roque Santa Cruz's brief goal-scoring run in Europe, having enjoyed a far briefer spell of stardom than almost anyone else. Signed by Wigan Athletic from Egyptian giant Zamalek for just £1.5 million in 2008, he began the season looking like prime Christian Vieri. 6'1", powerful, direct, and lethal in front of goal, I can remember Zaki coming to the KC Stadium and bagging a brace as we were thrashed by Wigan, and he looked like a world-class centre-forward who had been playing at that level for all of his life. In his first 10 games, he scored 8 goals and was in the running for the Premier League Golden Boot. Unfortunately, Zaki only scored 3 goals in his next 26 games in English football, for both Wigan and Hull City. And even after he returned to Egypt, his career never really recovered, meaning he had effectively peaked at the age of 25. Zaki's demise began with a big fallout with Steve Bruce, but for that brief period of brilliance, the streets will never forget. Just a shame we never saw anything like that after he signed for Hull City. I can pick out a 7-man bench featuring some more familiar streets won't forget faces, namely Ali Al-Habsi, Christopher Samba, Lomblar, Michu, Hatem Ben Arfa, Giovanni, and Fabrizio Miccoli. Further honourable mentions go to the likes of John O'Shea, the streets will certainly never ever forget that nutmeg on Luis Figo, Matty Taylor, Pedro Mendes, Antonio Cassano, Juan Roman Riquelme, Nani, Adel Tarat, Dimitri Payet, Hugo Rodallega, Giuliano Belletti, Shinsuke Nakamura, and Andy Johnson. Of course, those are just a random selection of very Premier League-centric players, as is the 11 itself, by virtue of the person creating this video and the bulk of our audience. I could have picked players like Vasilis Hatzpanagis and Magico Gonzalez, but I don't think that's the type of player that people typically mean when they use the expression, the streets won't forget. In charge of the 11, I'm afraid this is going to be a rare occasion in which I don't remove my black and amber tinted spectacles, since my first choice is Phil Brown. From the bronzed look to the pink jumper, oversized poppy, and Partridge-esque press conferences, Brown is seen as something of a joke these days, even amongst some Hull City fans. Beyond the mahogany veneer though, Brown was obviously a very capable manager, who achieved something quite special at Hull City. He inherited a team within the Championship relegation zone, he guided them to safety within a matter of months, and the following season, when the Tigers were still being tipped for relegation by some, he led the team to the most unlikely of promotions to the Premier League, a first for the club, and then he only went and kept the team in the division. That success perhaps went to his head, along with talk of the England job. And admittedly, it was downhill from there. But to my mind, Brown is Hull City's greatest manager of all time, and his achievements in East Yorkshire are all too often overlooked. It's a shame that he's never really been able to recover from being let go by the club. So that is it for today's video, but thank you all as ever for watching. Give us a like if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens.